My name is Emily Harper, and at 22, I am still navigating the delicate balance between finding myself and surviving the weight of my family's expectations. I grew up in a tidy suburban neighborhood in Evanston, Illinois, just north of Chicago, where manicured lawns and annual block parties masked the undercurrent of competition that defined my family. The Harpers are the kind of people who measure worth by tangible achievements, Instagram followers, job titles, or the grandeur of a wedding venue. In their eyes, I have always been the outlier, the quiet dreamer who never quite measured up to their polished standards. My cousin Sarah, on the other hand, is the family's shining star, the embodiment of everything they value. At 26, she's already checked every box on their unwritten list of success: a high-flying marketing job in downtown Chicago, an engagement at 24, and a wedding at 25 that could have been ripped from the pages of a lifestyle magazine. I, by contrast, am the artsy Anya label that sounds affectionate but carries a sting, implying I'm aimless, unmoored, and unlikely to ever catch up. Our family loves gatherings, but not for the sake of connection. Holiday dinners, summer barbecues, and milestone celebrations are less about warmth and more about performance, a stage where everyone displays their latest accomplishments. My parents, aunts, and uncles sit around tables cluttered with charcuterie boards and wine glasses, swapping stories about promotions, vacations, or their children's triumphs. Sarah's name always dominates these conversations. "Did you see Sarah's latest campaign for that tech startup?" my aunt would say, her voice brimming with pride. "She's practically running the department now." Or my mom, with a smile that never quite reached her eyes, would add, "Sarah's fiancé took her to Paris for Valentine's Day." So romantic. Meanwhile, I'd sit at the edge of the table, picking at my plate, waiting for someone to ask about my life. They rarely did. When they did, it was with a tone that felt more like obligation than interest. "So, Emily, still working at that coffee shop?" Or, "You're taking classes again? What's the plan this time?" The questions weren't malicious, but they cut like paper's maul, sharp and impossible to ignore. I dropped out of college after my first year at a state university, overwhelmed by the pressure to choose a practical major like business or nursing. I wasn't ready to commit to a path that didn't feel like mine, so I moved back home and started working part-time at Brewed Awakening, a cozy coffee shop in downtown Evanston. The job wasn't glamorous, but I loved the rhythm of it, the hiss of the espresso machine, the chatter of regulars, the chance to sketch in my notebook during slow hours. I enrolled in community college, taking art and literature classes to explore what sparked joy in me. To my family, though, my choices were a quiet rebellion, a refusal to play by their rules. "You're so creative, Emily," my mom would say, her voice laced with a mix of pity and exasperation, "but you need a real career eventually." My dad, a financial advisor who valued stability above all, was blunter. "You can't live off doodles and lattes forever." Their words clung to me, heavy and unshakable, like damp clothes after a rainstorm. The comparisons to Sarah were relentless. She was the family's MVP, a blonde, charismatic whirlwind who curated her life with the precision of a social media influencer. Her Instagram was a gallery of perfectly filtered moments: brunch at trendy Chicago restaurants, vacations in Tulum, her engagement ring sparkling against a backdrop of Lake Michigan. At 23, she got engaged to her boyfriend, a lawyer named Ethan, in a proposal that involved a rooftop dinner and a photographer to capture every moment. Their wedding, a year later, was a 3-day extravaganza at a vineyard in Napa Valley, complete with a string quartet, a custom floral arch, and a hashtag that trended locally. My family talked about it for months, as if it were a royal coronation. "Sarah just knows how to do things right," my aunt gushed at a Christmas dinner, passing around her phone to show photos of Sarah in her lace gown. I nodded, forcing a smile, even as I felt myself shrinking into the background. I tried to be part of the family's orbit, showing up to every event with a gift or a homemade dessert, hoping my presence would earn me a place at their table. Birthdays, Thanksgivings, Even Sarah's engagement party, I was there, dressed in my best thrift store finds, making small talk with relatives who seemed to forget my name. At Sarah's engagement party, I spent hours helping set up decorations, only to overhear my mom whisper to an aunt, "Emily's sweet, but she's just not ambitious like Sarah." I pretended not to hear, focusing on arranging mason jars filled with fairy lights. But the words lodged in my chest, a quiet ache that followed me home. The hardest moment came at Sarah's wedding. I was 20 then, still figuring out who I was, and I wanted to show up for her despite the growing distance between us. I spent weeks saving up to buy a modest navy dress from a department store sale rack, hoping it would blend in with the vineyard's elegant aesthetic. I arrived early, my hair carefully curled, carrying a thoughtful gift, a hand-painted picture frame I'd made for Sarah and Ethan. But when I reached the venue, a planner with a clipboard stopped me at the entrance. "Name?" she asked, scanning her list. "Emily Harper," I said, my voice steady. She frowned, flipping through pages. "Oh, you're here. You're at table 12. Table 12, as I later discovered, was the overflow table, tucked near the catering tent, reserved for distant cousins, plus ones, and a few of Ethan's college friends who didn't quite make the main guest list. I sat there, surrounded by strangers who made polite but awkward conversation, watching the main tables glow under chandeliers and laughter. During her speech, Sarah stood at the head table, radiant in her gown, her voice carrying over the clink of champagne glasses. "To everyone who made this day perfect," she said, her eyes sweeping the room, "you're the ones who matter most, and you're right here with me." I waited for a glance, a nod, anything to acknowledge that I was part of her world, but her gaze never reached table 12. I was 3 rows back, near the portable restrooms, my gift unopened in a pile of wrapped boxes. Later that night, as guests danced under a canopy of stars, Sarah found me near the dessert table. She was flushed from wine, her veil slightly askew, her smile sharp with self-assurance. "Emily," she said, slurring slightly, "you know, some people just aren't cut out for the big moments. You're more behind the scenes, right?" "That's okay," she laughed, patting my arm as if she'd paid me a compliment, then twirled back to the dance floor. I stood frozen, her words echoing in my head like a slammed door. It wasn't just a jab, it was a verdict, a declaration that I didn't belong in the spotlight, that my place was in the shadows of her story. I drove home that night, the 2-hour trip from Napa to my parents' house silent except for the hum of the radio. I didn't cry, but I felt something harden inside me, a resolve to stop chasing their approval. For months, I distanced myself, skipping a few family events with excuses about work or school. But the hurt lingered, a bruise that throbbed every time I saw Sarah's latest post or heard my mom recount her achievements. I kept showing up when I had to: Thanksgiving, my dad's birthday, because that's what family does, or so I'd been taught. Each time, I braced myself for the inevitable questions. "Still at the coffee shop? When are you going back to college? Have you seen Sarah's new condo?" I'd smile, nod, and change the subject, but inside, I was screaming. I wasn't invisible, but they made me feel like I was. And yet, I kept coming back, hoping one day they'd see Minot as a project to fix, but as Emily, the girl who was trying, who was enough. 2 years after Sarah's wedding, at the age of 22, I found myself in a place I hadn't expected, standing on the precipice of a life that felt like it could be mine. The sting of my family's judgment still lingered, but I was learning to carry it more lightly, focusing on my part-time job at Brood Awakening and my community college classes in Evanston. It was during this time, in the spring of 2024, that I met Ryan Carter, a 30-year-old graphic designer whose quiet presence would change everything. Our meeting wasn't the stuff of rom-coms, no grand gestures or serendipitous collisions. I was helping set up for a local art gallery opening, arranging folding chairs and taping down extension cords when Ryan wandered in, carrying a portfolio of his work for the exhibit. He caught my eye not because of his appearance, though his dark hair and easy smile were hard to miss, but because he noticed the small sketchbook I'd left open on a table. "These are good," he said, flipping through my doodles of coffee cups and city skylines. "You've got an eye for detail." I blushed, unused to compliments that didn't come with a caveat, and mumbled a thank you. By the end of the night, we were talking about our favorite Chicago murals and laughing over his terrible puns about paintbrushes. Ryan was different from anyone I dated before. He didn't care that I wasn't on a fast track to a corner office or that my apartment was a cramped studio filled with secondhand furniture. He was a freelancer, accustomed to the ebb and flow of creative work, and he saw my coffee shop job and art classes not as failures but as pieces of a life being built. With him, I felt seen not as a project to be polished, like my family wanted, but as Emily, the woman who was enough just as she was. We started dating, our evenings filled with walks along Lake Michigan, visits to indie bookstores, and quiet nights sketching together at his loft. Ryan had a calmness that steadied me when my insecurities flared, and a confidence that encouraged me to speak up when I hesitated. For the first time, I didn't feel like I had to apologize for who I was. After a year of dating, Ryan proposed. It was a crisp autumn day in 2024, and we were hiking in the Blue Ridge Mountains, a spontaneous weekend trip to Virginia to escape the Chicago bustle. At a lookout point, with rolling hills stretching below us, he pulled out a simple silver ring during a picnic of sandwiches and iced tea. "Emily," he said, his voice steady but soft, "I want to build a life with you. Will you marry me?" My heart raced, not from doubt, but from the overwhelming certainty that this was right. I said yes, tears blurring my vision, and we laughed as he slid the ring onto my finger. But as we sat there, wrapped in the moment, he asked a question that sent a chill through me. "Will your family be at the wedding?" The question wasn't accusatory, just curious, but it unearthed a fear I'd buried since Sarah's wedding, the dread of inviting my family's judgment into our happiness. I'd introduced Ryan to my family once, 6 months earlier, at a cousin's baby shower. It had been a mistake. My mom interrogated him about his freelance career, her tone implying it was a hobby, not a livelihood. "So, you don't have a steady paycheck?" she'd asked, eyebrows raised. My dad, ever the pragmatist, chimed in, "Graphic design's tough. You ever think about something more stable?" Sarah, who was there with her husband Ethan, smirked and said, "It's cute that you two met at a gallery." Very bohemian. Ryan handled it with grace, deflecting their questions with polite humor, but I saw the way their words landed, like pebbles in a still pond, rippling through my confidence. Driving home, I apologized, but Ryan just squeezed my hand. "They don't get to define us," he said. Still, the memory of that day loomed as we began planning our wedding. The planning process was both exhilarating and daunting. Ryan and I wanted something that reflected us, simple, heartfelt, and free of the performative grandeur my family worshipped. We spent evenings browsing venues online, sipping coffee at our kitchen table, and dreaming of a day that felt authentic. But every time we discussed the guest list, I hesitated. The thought of inviting my family filled me with a familiar dread, their backhanded compliments, their subtle digs, the way they turn our joy into a referendum on my worth. I kept pushing the task to the bottom of our to-do list, hoping to avoid it altogether, Ryan noticed. One evening, as we sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping through a wedding magazine, he set down his highlighter and looked at me. What's going on with the guest list? It's like you're avoiding it." His voice was gentle, not accusing, but it forced me to confront the truth. I took a deep breath and told him everything. I recounted Sarah's wedding, the kids' table, her cruel remark about me not being cut out for big moments, the way my family made me feel like an afterthought. I admitted how their judgment had shaped me, how I'd spent years trying to earn a place at their table, only to be reminded I didn't belong. "I don't want them at our wedding," I said, my voice trembling. "Not because I hate them, but because I don't want to spend our day bracing for their comments." Ryan listened, his eyes steady, his hand resting on mine. He didn't interrupt or offer quick fixes, he just let me speak, let the weight of my words fill the room. When I finished, he leaned forward and said, "Then, Let's make this our story, not theirs. We don't need their approval to be happy." His words were like a key turning in a lock, releasing something I'd held tight for too long. That night, something shifted inside me. It wasn't rage or bitterness, but a quiet clarity, a realization that I'd been carrying the burden of my family's expectations for years, letting their version of me define my worth. I didn't want to start my marriage under that shadow. Ryan and I decided to keep our wedding small, intimate, and true to who we were. We chose a rustic barn venue in rural Virginia, surrounded by wildflower fields and strung with fairy lights, a place that felt warm and unpretentious. The guest list would include Ryan's parents, a few close friends, my art professor who'd become a mentor, and a handful of coworkers who'd cheered me on through late shifts and late-night study sessions. As I typed out the names on our spreadsheet, I paused at the section for my family. My finger hovered over the keyboard, Sarah's name blinking in my mind. I thought of her smirk, the kids' table, the way she dismissed me as behind the scenes. I deleted her name, then my parents, my aunts, my uncles. It wasn't anger driving might was peace, a choice to protect the life I was building with Ryan. We sent out save-the-date cards a week later, simple postcards with a photo of us laughing in the Blue Ridge Mountains, Ryan's arm around my waist. I posted one on Instagram with a caption, "Can't wait to say I do with the people who lift us up." It was a small declaration, but it felt monumental, like I was finally writing the first page of my own story. I didn't know then how my family would react, or how fiercely they'd try to pull me back into their narrative. But in that moment, sitting with Ryan, our hands intertwined, I felt something I hadn't in years, the freedom to choose myself. The decision to exclude my family from our wedding guest list felt like a quiet revolution, a reclamation of my right to joy without their judgment. But revolutions, even personal ones, rarely go unchallenged. In the weeks following our save-the-date announcement, the backlash from my family arrived with the force of a Midwest storm, swift and unrelenting. Ryan and I had chosen a rustic barn venue in rural Virginia for our wedding, a place that embodied our value as simple, authentic, and surrounded by people who genuinely cared for us. The save-the-date postcard, featuring a candid photo of us laughing in the Blue Ridge Mountains, was mailed to a curated list of friends, Ryan's parents, and a few mentors. I shared the image on Instagram, captioning it, "Excited to say I do with the people who lift us up." The post was meant to be a celebration, a public affirmation of the life we were building. Instead, it became the spark that ignited my family's indignation. The first salvo came from Sarah, my cousin, whose perfect life had always been the yardstick against which I was measured. Within hours of my Instagram post, my phone buzzed with a string of texts from her. "A wedding? And no invite for me? Read the first." Then, "Wow, Emily, I didn't think you'd stoop this low." And finally, a single word, "classy." The messages were sharp, designed to wound, but they were only the beginning. The next morning, my mother called 3 times, leaving a voicemail after the 3rd attempt. "Emily, this isn't how family works," she said, her voice a mix of hurt and reproach. "You're shutting us out without even a conversation. Call me back." My father, who preferred written communication to avoid emotional entanglements, sent an email with the subject line, "Disappointed. The body was brief but cutting. I thought we raised you better than this." Your choices reflect poorly on all of us. I stared at the words, each one a familiar echo of the criticism I'd endured for years, but now amplified by their collective outrage. Sarah escalated the conflict online, where she wielded her social media presence like a weapon. She posted a cryptic Instagram story, a photo of herself in a bridesmaid dress from a friend's wedding, overlaid with text, "When your own cousin forgets who was there for her growing up." Number family first. The post didn't name me directly, but the implication was clear, and her followers, many of whom were mutual acquaintances, piled on in the comments. "Families can be so ungrateful," one wrote. "You're too good for this drama, Sarah," added another. A few even tagged me, their messages dripping with judgment. "At Emily Harper, really?" I didn't respond, but each notification felt like a pinprick, a reminder of how easily my family could spin a narrative to paint me as the villain. My aunts and uncles joined the fray with their own messages, some veiled as concern. "Are you okay, Emily?" This isn't like you, and others openly hostile, like a text from my uncle that read, "You're embarrassing yourself and the whole family." The onslaught was overwhelming, a coordinated effort to guilt me into submission. I'd anticipated some pushback, but the intensity surprised me. For years, I'd played the role they expected. The quiet, compliant daughter who showed up to every event, smiled through their jabs, and never challenged their hierarchy. By excluding them from my wedding, I'd broken an unspoken contract, and they were determined to pull me back into line. Ryan noticed my tension, the way I'd check my phone compulsively only to set it down with a sigh. "You don't owe them an explanation," he said one evening as we cooked dinner in our small Evanston apartment. "This is about us, not them." His words grounded me, but the messages kept coming, each one chipping away at the peace I'd fought so hard to claim. Amid the storm, an unexpected voice cut through the noise. My Aunt Linda, my mother's older sister and a retired nurse with a reputation for blunt honesty, called me one afternoon. Linda was the family outlier, the one who skipped the performative brunches and spoke her mind without pretense. We hadn't talked in months, so her name on my caller ID piqued my curiosity. "Hey, kid," she said, her voice gravelly from years of early morning hospital shifts. "I'm not one for meddling, but your mom's been telling everyone you're having some kind of breakdown, says Ryan's got you brainwashed or something. You holding up okay?" Her directness caught me off guard, and I laughed a genuine, relieved laugh that surprised me. "Aunt Linda, I'm fine," I said. "Better than fine. I didn't invite them because I'm tired of feeling like I don't belong at their table. I just want a wedding that feels like us." There was a long pause on the other end, the kind that made me think she was choosing her words carefully. "Good for you," she finally said. "I saw how they treated you, Emily. Every holiday you'd show up with those little gifts or desserts, and they'd act like you were just the help. And don't get me started on Sarah's wedding, that speech of hers, calling out everyone but you. That was cruel. I told your mom she was out of line, but she brushed it off, said you were tough enough to handle it. Tough enough, my ass. They stopped seeing you as a person and started seeing you as someone to fix." Her words hit me harder than I expected, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. Someone had noticed, not just noticed, but cared enough to call it out. "I just wanted a day without their judgment," I said quietly, my throat tight. "And you're gonna have it," Linda replied, her tone firm. "You're not wrong for choosing yourself. They're just mad you stopped playing their game." The conversation with Linda was a lifeline, a validation I hadn't realized I needed. For years, I'd felt like I was shouting into a void, my pain invisible to those around me. Knowing that Linda had seen I had seen me gave me a strength I hadn't known I possessed. That night, I told Ryan about the call as we sat on our couch, a blanket draped over our legs. He listened, his hand resting on mine, and when I finished, he pulled me close. "I'm so proud of you," he said, his voice soft but certain. "You're standing up for what matters." His support, combined with Linda's words, fortified me against the ongoing barrage from my family. The texts and voicemails continued, cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. Sarah's husband Ethan with a condescending "hope you're happy with this choice," but they began to feel less like daggers and more like noise. A tantrum from people who couldn't control me anymore. As the wedding date approached, I found myself returning to Linda's words, replaying them like a mantra. "You're not wrong for choosing yourself." They reminded me that my decision wasn't about punishing my family, but about protecting the life Ryan and I were building. The barn venue in Virginia was booked, the fairy lights ordered, the guest list finalized with names of people who'd shown up for us in ways my family never had. I didn't know then how far my family would go to reclaim their narrative, or how their presence would loom over our wedding day. But in those moments, bolstered by Ryan's love and Linda's unexpected alliance, I felt ready to face whatever came next, secure in the knowledge that I was finally writing my own story. The morning of my wedding dawned with a crisp Virginia breeze, the sky painted in soft golds and grays that seemed to promise a day of quiet beauty. At 22, I stood in a small farmhouse near our chosen barn venue, slipping into a lace dress that felt like an extension of myself, simple, elegant, and unpretentious. Ryan, my 30-year-old fiancé, was preparing in a nearby cabin, and the air buzzed with the anticipation of a day we'd crafted to reflect our love, free from the weight of my family's expectations. The guest list was intimate. Ryan's parents, our closest friends, my art professor, and a few coworkers who'd become like family. Every detail, from the wildflower bouquets to the string lights strung across the barn, was a testament to the life we were building together. But as I adjusted my veil, a shadow from my past loomed, threatening to disrupt the peace I'd fought so hard to claim. Halfway through getting ready, the wedding coordinator, a kind woman named Clara, rushed into the farmhouse, her face flushed with urgency. "Emily," she said, catching her breath, "there's a situation at the gate. Your mom, your dad, and your cousin Sarah are here. They're saying it's a family emergency, and they need to see you." My stomach tightened, a familiar knot of dread resurfacing. I'd anticipated some last-ditch effort from my family after their barrage of texts, calls, and social media jabs, but their physical presence at the venue was a boldness I hadn't prepared for. For a moment I stood frozen, the mirror reflecting my wide eyes and the delicate flowers woven into my hair. Then, a calm resolve settled over me, as steady as the heartbeat I could feel in my chest. "Tell them the guest list is final," I said, my voice even. "They're not invited." Clara nodded, her expression a mix of sympathy and admiration, and hurried back to the gate. I turned to the mirror, smoothed my dress, and walked toward the ceremony site, determined to keep my family's drama from tainting our day. The ceremony was everything I dreamed it could be. Under a wooden arch draped with greenery, Ryan and I exchanged vows, our voices steady despite the tears in our eyes. Our guests' friends who'd cheered us through late-night talks, Ryan's parents who'd welcomed me like a daughter, my professor who'd encouraged my art filled the space with warmth and laughter. As Ryan slipped a ring onto my finger, promising to stand by me through every storm, I felt a lightness I'd never known, as if the years of feeling invisible were dissolving in the glow of this moment. My family didn't cross my mind once during the ceremony. Their absence wasn't a void, it was a gift, a space to breathe and be fully present with the people who truly saw me. After the ceremony, as guests mingled over appetizers and soft music played, the photographer, a friend from my art class named Mia, approached me with a hesitant look. "Emily," she whispered, "there's something you should know. There are a few people lingering near the woods at the edge of the property. They haven't come in, but they're watching." My jaw tightened, a flicker of irritation breaking through my calm. I didn't need to ask who they were. Stepping to the side of the barn, I glanced across the gravel path that bordered the venue. There they stood, half hidden among the trees. My mother, wearing a navy dress I recognized from Sarah's engagement party, her arms crossed tightly. My father, fidgeting with his phone as if it held the answers to his discomfort. And Sarah, unmistakable in a bright red jumpsuit, her face a mask of indignation. Even from a distance, I could see her pursed lips and the way she scanned the crowd, as if calculating who might notice her exclusion. They looked like spectators at a play they hadn't been cast in, unwilling to leave the stage. I turned to Mia, forcing a small smile. "Don't worry about it," I said. "Just keep them out of the photos. Crop wide if you have to." She nodded, relieved, and returned to her camera. But as I watched my family hover at the edges of my happiness, something shifted inside me, not anger or fear, but a profound clarity. They hadn't come out of love or regret. They were here to assert their claim, to remind me of their perceived right to dictate my story. The realization steadied me, and I rejoined Ryan, slipping my hand into his as we laughed with our friends, the music and chatter drowning out the ghosts in the woods. Later, as the sun dipped low, casting a golden hue over the reception, I overheard their voices again. I'd stepped away to retrieve a shawl from the farmhouse, taking a path that skirted the property's edge. Their words, sharp and bitter, carried through the trees. "She's so selfish," Sarah hissed. "This is humiliating for all of us." My mother's voice followed, laced with indignation. "We should have been let in." "She's our daughter." My father muttered something inaudible, his tone heavy with disapproval. I paused, hidden by the foliage, my heart pounding not from fear, but from a need to end this chapter once and for all. Stepping forward, I emerged into their view, startling them into silence. My mother gasped, Sarah's eyes narrowed, and my father froze, his phone still in hand. "I know you're upset," I said, my voice calm but unwavering. "But you weren't uninvited out of spite. You were never invited because this day isn't about fixing the version of me you've created. It's about celebrating who I am without you. The fact that you're hiding in the woods instead of sharing in our joy tells me I made the right choice." Sarah's face twisted with defiance. "You think you're above us now?" she snapped. "No," I replied, meeting her gaze. "I think I'm free of you." Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked back to the reception, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses pulling me forward. Each step felt like an exhale, a release of the weight I'd carried for years. That night, as the reception wound down and guests danced under the fairy lights, Ryan and I slipped away to the farmhouse porch for a moment of quiet. We sat wrapped in a blanket, the stars bright above us, when Ryan handed me a small envelope. "This came while you were getting ready," he said softly. "I didn't want to give it to you before the ceremony." My name was scrawled on the front in my mother's handwriting. Inside was a $10,000 check and a note, "For the wedding. Don't let pride ruin your future. Think of what's best, Mom." The words were a final attempt at control, a leash disguised as generosity. I laughed, a sound born of liberation, and walked to the nearby fire pit where embers still glowed. Without hesitation, I dropped the check into the flames, watching it curl and blacken, its ashes rising into the night. Ryan stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder, and we returned to the porch, the fire's warmth fading behind us. In that moment, surrounded by the life we'd chosen, I was free not just from my family, but from the need to prove I deserved to be. The days following our wedding in the Virginia barn felt like the first pages of a new chapter, one written in my own hand. Ryan and I returned to our modest apartment in Richmond, a cozy space filled with thrift store furniture and the soft morning light that spilled through our balcony doors. At 22, I was a newlywed, navigating the delicate balance of building a marriage while shedding the lingering shadows of my family's judgment. The wedding photos arrived a week later, capturing the joy of our day, the wildflower bouquets, Ryan's warm smile, our friends dancing under fairy lights. Not a trace of my mother, father, or Sarah lingered in the backgrounds, a visual testament to the boundaries I'd set. Yet, even as we settled into our new life, my family's attempts to reclaim their narrative persisted, testing the resolve I'd forged on our wedding day. The first sign of their campaign came through whispers and rumors. My cousin Mia, a quiet 19-year-old who'd always stayed out of family drama, left a hesitant voicemail a week after the wedding. "Hey, Emily," she said, her voice tinged with concern. "I don't want to stir things up, but Aunt Karen's been saying you had some kind of meltdown at the wedding. She told everyone you banned the family because Ryan's controlling or something. I saw your photos online, though you looked so happy. Are you okay?" I replayed the message twice, a mix of amusement and frustration rising in my chest. The photos Mia mentioned, shared on my Instagram with captions about love and chosen family, told a story my family couldn't accept, one where I was thriving without them. I called Mia back, assuring her I was fine, better than fine, and thanked her for checking in. Her call, though, was a warning of the narrative my family was spinning. Social media confirmed it. My mother posted a vague status on Facebook the day after the wedding. "When you pour your heart into raising a child only to be shut out, you learn to let go and pray they find their way." Heartbroken but holding on to faith, Number family first. The comments poured in, a chorus of sympathy from her friends and distant relatives. "You're so strong, Karen." And, "Kids these days don't appreciate their parents." Sarah's best friend added, "I can't believe she didn't even let you stay." "That's cold." Sarah herself chimed in with a subtweet on X. "When your cousin thinks she's too good for the people who raised her, guess some people need to feel special." Number priorities. The posts were calculated, designed to paint me as an ungrateful daughter led astray by a manipulative husband. It would have been laughable if it weren't so deliberate, a concerted effort to rewrite my choice as a betrayal rather than a stand for my own happiness. At first, I tried to ignore it. Ryan and I were busy building our life, painting our apartment walls a soft sage green, hosting game nights with friends, and dreaming about the future. But the rumors spread, reaching colleagues at Brood Awakening, and even my art professor, who emailed to check in after hearing concerning gossip from a mutual acquaintance. The weight of their narrative threatened to pull me back into the role I'd spent years escaping, the wayward daughter who needed fixing. I confided in Ryan one evening as we cooked dinner, the scent of garlic and basil filling our kitchen. "They're trying to make me the villain," I said, stirring a pot of pasta. "It's like they can't stand that I'm happy without them." Ryan set down his knife, his expression steady. "They're losing control, Em. That's why they're doing this." "But you don't have to play their game." His words echoed Aunt Linda's from weeks earlier, reinforcing the truth I was learning to embrace. My worth wasn't tied to their approval. I decided to respond, not with the reactive anger they expected, but with clarity and finality. I sat at our kitchen table one night, a cup of tea cooling beside me, and wrote a letter, not a text, not a social media post, but a physical letter, typed and printed on crisp paper. I addressed it to my parents, Sarah, and a few relatives who'd expressed concern, including Mia and Aunt Linda. The words flowed with a calm precision, each sentence a brick in the wall I was building between my past and my future. "Dear family," I began, "your reactions to my wedding have made it clear that you prefer a version of my story that fits your expectations over the truth I've chosen to live. Let me be clear, I didn't exclude you out of malice or manipulation. I built a day with people who love me for who I am, not who you think I should be. Sarah, at your wedding, you told me I wasn't cut out for big moments, that I was better behind the scenes. You laughed, but those words, and years of similar dismissals, shaped how I saw myself. I internalized every sidelong glance, every backhanded compliment, every time I was treated as an afterthought. I stayed silent because I believed family meant enduring pain, but I've learned that love doesn't demand suffering. Mom, Dad, your $10,000 check wasn't an act of love, it was a transaction, a way to buy my compliance. I didn't need it, and I don't need your approval to build a life with Ryan. You weren't excluded from my wedding to punish you. You were absent because you had no role in creating the joy of that day. For years, I tried to fit into your mold, to be the daughter and cousin you could brag about, but I'm done shrinking to meet your standards. I've let you go, not to hurt you, but to stop breaking myself. This is my story now, and I'm writing it without your permission." I sealed the letters, mailed them, and felt a weight lift. There was no response and no apologies, no angry rebuttals, just silence. But something unexpected followed in the months after. Mia messaged me, saying she'd always felt overshadowed by Sarah too, and admired my courage. A family friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, sent a note saying she was proud of me for standing up. Aunt Linda called, her voice warm with approval. "They'll never admit they were wrong," she said, "but they know. Deep down, they know." Her words were enough, a quiet affirmation that I'd made the right choice. 3 months after the wedding, Ryan and I settled into our Richmond life. Our apartment, though small, was a sanctuary, a balcony for morning coffee, a corner for my easel, a shelf for Ryan's design books. Some evenings, I'd watch him sketch at our table, his focus a reminder of the love we'd chosen, free of conditions. Other times, I'd paint while he cooked, the soft clink of pots blending with our laughter. The memory of Sarah's wedding, her smirk, the kids' table, the years of feeling less than faded into the background, replaced by a truth I'd fought to claim: love isn't earned through pain. It's built with people who show up, who see you, who stay. I no longer wait for my family's approval or brace for their criticism. The life I'm living, imperfect, vibrant, and wholly mine, is the one I chose when I stopped seeking their permission. And as I stand on our balcony, watching the sunrise over Richmond, I know I wouldn't trade it for a seat at their table, not now, not ever.